this is an absolutely amazing turnout. Thank you guys so much for coming. When I heard I was on day one, 11 a.m., across from Robert, and the introductions, I figured it'll be like 3 people, and it'll be great. But this is amazing. My name is Ricky. I run a YouTube channel called 2-Bit Da Vinci. We talk about the future of technology, energy, and transportation. I have my team back there in the very back. Chris, Juan, Rohan, you guys can raise your hands. There they are. Yeah, this has been one of the funnest. Thank you so much. So first and foremost, I want to give a really, really big shout out to the entire Fully Charged Live team, especially Dan, Sophie, Francesca. You guys were awesome the last couple of months with taking care of all this stuff and coordination. I think Sophie is in here somewhere. There she is. She's back there. Let's give her a big round of the hand for Sophie. She sent an email a couple of days ago saying that the tickets were all sold out, and I was thinking, oh my goodness, this is happening. So thank you so much for that. And of course, Robert Llewellyn. One of the things I like to do every couple of years is I'll go to the Fully Charged YouTube channel and just go to the videos tab and sort by oldest and go check out his pilot episode. It is the coolest video you'll ever see. And this guy was a visionary. He kind of blazed a trail for all of us and this kind of excitement for the future again. And yeah, we're all here because of those guys. So that's just so great, and I'm just so grateful. So the reason why we're all here today is to talk about the end of the internal combustion car and why it'll happen sooner than you think. That's probably why you guys are all here. Does that sound good? Yeah. I think so what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the nature of disruption and why we as people are really bad at understanding how it happens, even the experts and the analysts and everybody else. And then I'll get into some specific details about why in the next 5 or 10 years, yeah, I think I heard that in the corner there. Yeah, exactly. So that's what we're talking about today. So first and foremost, humans are really bad at understanding how disruptions happen. We're kind of pattern recognition machines. We understand, okay, yesterday this happened, and we start to predict the sun will rise and set. But we can't see this level of change on the horizon, and this has happened time and time again. There's a great lecture by a gentleman named Tony Siva, and I'll publish this on our channel, and I'll put all the references of all the people I'm talking about on the video. But he mentions that in the mid-'80s, AT&T reaches out to a company called McKinley & Associates and asks, this wireless thing, is that going to be a big deal? Could you forecast in 15 years, in year 2000, how many wireless customers are we going to have? So McKinley takes a bunch of money, takes a bunch of time, the smartest people in the room, all the PhDs, the economists, the business people, the financial analysts, and they say, AT&T, we run the numbers. The answer is 900,000. You're going to have 900,000 wireless customers in the year 2000. AT&T goes, okay, that's not so much. Okay, we're not going to really, Turns out the actual number was about 100 million. They were off by a factor of 100. And where I went to school, that would be probably an F minus. But this happens over and over and over again. And in the course of history, look back to like the printing press, and the cotton gin. This happens where people don't understand how much disruption is on the horizon. So the first thing is that the adoption of technology follows an S-curve. So early days, it's really slow. It's like a couple of people, the early adopters, you guys, basically, all the guys that bought Teslas 8 years ago. The early adopters happens, and then there's the huge ramp up, the hockey stick moment. And that's where you go from 20% to 80% pretty quickly. And then the stragglers, the people who still had tube TVs until a couple of years ago, and the flip phones still, they'll be the last ones, and the curve kind of falls off. So the exciting part is we're on the hockey stick part, right? It took me about 8 weeks to get my Tesla. There's a huge wait list. That we're at this point where enough people talk about it. People have neighbors who have them. They've driven them, and we're buying electric vehicles, and they're better. They're not just cleaner or one thing. They're better in every way. So the same thing happened in 2007 with the iPhone. When the iPhone came out, Apple says, hey, here's a look at what we think the phone, the computer in your pocket will be. And all the bosses, the Steve Ballmers and the Nokia bosses and the Motorola bosses, they all said, this is a niche thing. It's not going to sell. No one's going to buy a phone for $600. That's just not going to happen. Those comments didn't really age well. If you fast forward 10 years, Microsoft, I actually liked the Windows Phone eventually that came out of it, but it was just too late at that point. Nokia has been bought and sold a handful of times now, and they're trying to be Android makers, very small players. Motorola, who was the company that you would have thought would make the phones. You would think, people said, oh, wait until Motorola makes their iPhone equivalent. No, never happen, right? Because disruptions happen from the outside. This is the other thing that people think is a lot of people will say, oh, wait until Honda and General Motors makes EVs, then Tesla's toast. That's not how disruptions happen because, well, I'll get to that. We'll get to that. So the iPhone had a similar kind of curve of adoption and acceptance and how it completely revolutionized and kind of destroyed the entire Nokia business model and industry. So one of my favorite lecturers is a man named Guy Kawasaki. He's a technologist in Silicon Valley. He is on the board of many companies. He's an Apple evangelist. And I like how he puts it probably the best. He says, disruption is jumping the curve. So we've been living in the last 100 years on the internal combustion engine car curve. And we have these little breakthroughs. Honda has VTEC, and it's 2% better, it's a little better. And Infinity recently, I have no idea what Infinity is doing. Their researching and development teams are working on gas cars still for some reason, but they have variable compression engines. And the technology engineering is fascinating, but it's a stupid way to spend your money because we're talking about 2%. Like, this is what we're dealing with. And the disruption happens when you jump curves. So the EV curve is just completely a different curve. It's not an evolution of the old way. This is a new trajectory. They're not 25% efficient, they're 75 and 85% efficient. So disruption happens when you jump curves. And the example that Guy has is the ICE industry, not the internal combustion engine, the ICE, like solid water industry. I just get that confusion. So if you think about ICE 1.0, we had these crazy people with this brilliant idea that we're going to go to frozen ponds and lakes and cut out huge chunks of ice, put them on sleds pulled by horses and take them to town and put them into insulated storage holding facilities for 3-4 months and sell it when it's hot. You can imagine how much ice must have cost. And I live in San Diego, there probably wouldn't be very much ice for us in San Diego. But if you ask them, hey, on this curve you're on, like, what do you want to see? What would really help business for you? They would say faster horses, lower drag sleds, bigger sleds, and sharper saws, right? But then something happens, like technology often does, and then we entered the next curve, which was ICE 2.0. And in ICE 2.0, you have these big companies that are making ice centrally. They have facilities to make ice in San Diego. It doesn't have to be in Minnesota or Massachusetts. My friend Matt's in the back there, I was thinking of him. And so the companies that started to make ice in these big warehouses in huge quantities aren't the ones that cut it from ponds. They were a different set of companies. And when ICE 2.0 happened, all those companies that cut ice and dragged it across state lines, they all went bankrupt. So now in ICE 2.0, we have icemen, just like milkmen. You'd have people who can deliver ice, and they'll come to your door and drop it off, and you'd have ice. I'm sure the prices came down a little bit. But then we have ICE 3.0, the refrigerator. And it wasn't the companies that were doing this. Even though they were freezing ice at industrial scale, you would think, hey, what if you shrunk it down and you put it in everyone's home, right? But they would have thought, nah, no one will buy that. Who needs that? They'll buy ice from us and we'll deliver it. So when the refrigerator companies came along and started putting ice makers in every person's home, guess what happened to the companies in ICE 2.0, right? And that's the thing. I think this is the part about technology that people don't fully grasp. Because we now live in the Netflix of ice, the on-demand model, right? And Netflix is another great example of disruption. Who's been to a Blockbuster recently, right? Yeah, they could have seen this coming. What an idea. What if you just streamed it at home and didn't have to go wait in line on a Friday night for 2 hours, right? They thought that's stupid. Who's going to do this? Who's going to want to, ship them in the mail? And they were just so late to that game. And it's, again, the same thing as when you got your blinders on and you're working on whatever you're working on, it's hard to step back and say, is there a radically, completely different way to do this? That takes visionaries, and those are really pretty rare in the world. Let's see, where are we? So one of my favorite authors and people was the late Carl Sagan. And in his book, The Demon Haunted World, yeah, there we go. Carl Sagan fans, I like that. In The Demon Haunted World, Science of the Candle in the Dark, he talks about how, isn't it interesting that until the advent of the aircraft, we didn't have stories about people being abducted by aliens. Like, the first recorded accounts of that happened after the airplane. And the reason why is we're not that clever. We weren't clever enough to have hallucinations or dreams or nightmares or whatever you want to call it until we saw this big metal bird fly in the sky. And then suddenly there's this thing that happens in your mind. You're like, okay, well, if we can make this crazy contraption that can fly in the sky, maybe there's aliens. And suddenly, like, the mind just kind of evolves from there. But we're not that clever. We don't have the creativity to see, like, what could be done until some crazy person does it, right? The Wright Brothers, for example. So in the case of, like, the iPhone or Netflix or whatever else the case might be, the idea that Tony Seba says is that disruption happens when we reach a convergence of technology. The idea is the iPhone didn't happen in 1999, and it didn't happen in 2020. It happened in 2007. And his argument is that's when we had SoC, systems on chips, that were powerful enough, lithium-ion batteries that were dense enough, touch capacitive screens. And when all of that technology converged, we had the iPhone. And I mean, he's right, I agree with that. But I think he's missing one key ingredient, and I think that is the crazy visionary with, like, a deep pocketbook, right? In that case, Steve Jobs. He saw this thing coming, and yeah, all those components were there. They didn't invent any of those pieces. He put it all together. But there was, in his book, he talks about meeting with the team in Corning, New York, who make the makers of glass. And they had this new thing called Gorilla Glass. And he met with them and said, hey, we need this. Can you make it by the millions for our phones? And they said, no, there's no way we can do that. We just got this thing. We don't have the means to make it in that scale yet. And he said, yeah, you do, and you're going to. I'll see you in April. And they're like, this guy's a lunatic. But guess what? They did it. The iPhone ships. So I say that there's a convergence involved, but there's also that crazy lunatic who sees things differently, Elon Musk. Just imagine pitching the idea for Tesla, right? It's, if we took every person's laptop battery, car battery, phone battery, every battery on this planet, we would not have enough to make the cars that they're making. Everybody else says, okay, there goes that. Let's, back to the drawing board, another idea. He just said, let's just do this thing. We'll build the Gigafactory, the biggest building on Earth. And we're going to make more batteries than the rest of the world combined currently. We're going to double the output of the world's batteries. So that's the secret ingredient. When you have those things happen, we have the convergence of technology. We have that radical vision at a time when the rest of us aren't ready to accept that yet. You get disruption. So that's kind of, I think, the reason for why disruption happens. Next, let's talk about some of the details or the exact specifics of why I think this is going to happen. I think we're doing good on time, too. So, first and foremost, I think the people in this room would buy an electric car if it cost a little bit more. Either you have the vision and the understanding that there's no maintenance and oil changes and smog checks and all this other stuff. Filling it up is half or a quarter as expensive. And like the long-term cost of ownership is actually pretty much on parity now. And in fact, I would argue, based on the model, it might actually be cheaper than gas cars today. But the average consumer can't see it that way. If you go to a lot and there's the Kia Soul and the Kia Soul EV, and the Kia Soul EV costs $4,000 more, they think I'll get the gas version. So first and foremost, we need price parity. early adopters, the people on that beginning part of the S-curve, they'll buy today, they have bought today, and they will continue to. But I think we're at the brink in the next couple of years of price parity. And that happens when every one of these car companies and every one of these, like LG and all these different companies are making batteries at scales never seen before. That will drive down the prices. And at some point, we'll have parity. And actually, when there is parity, you'll never see the gas version and the electric version sitting side by side. That'll never happen because nobody would take the gas version. That day comes, it's over. It's already just pure economics, right? There's dozens of reasons why you want to go electric. They're faster, they're clean, they're all this stuff. But the reality is, for the rest of that S-curve, of the last 50, 60%, it has to be economically the right choice. And it's going to be in the next couple of years, which is probably the biggest and most exciting part about this. The second thing, and this is, again, already happening, is the bottom will fall out of the luxury car market. In 2019, the Tesla Model 3 sold more than the BMW 3 Series, the Audi A4, the Mercedes C-Class, the Lexus ES combined. And the reason why is because the perception of what is desirable, what it is you want to do. I made it. I'm an executive. I got a promotion. I got a raise. I'm married now. I have whatever it is that you have in your mind that says, I made it. I want that next thing has changed. It's not a BMW. If I told my neighbor, hey, I bought a new BMW 3 Series, they'd go, I don't care. Not interesting at all. I told my neighbors I bought a new Tesla Model 3, and they were all scheduling like, hey, when can we go out? And the neighbor right behind me even, he was like, I want to take you to dinner so that way I'll be the first person to get a ride. That's interesting because people are interested. They're like, oh, wow. And you show them like the car driving itself and 0 to 60 in 2.9 seconds, and it's a really easy sales pitch. And my neighbor's wife wants to buy a Tesla Model 3. It happens really quickly. So it's the perceived value. It's that luxury brand. It's like Apple is really good at this. Like Apple has done a great job of being desirable compared to the other phone makers. Even though Apple is only like a 20% market share when it comes to like sales, they have like 70% of the profit. And I think Tesla is going to be kind of that same company. They're going to be so desirable that it's going to cause the luxury market to collapse, at which point, what does BMW do? Are we going to keep making old 3 Series that don't sell, which is already happening today? They're all scrambling, and they're all taking it in different ways. I think the VW group is the most progressive in Europe, and I think it's because of all the scandals and the Dieselgate and everything else. They have a very varnished track record. I don't think they're seen very positively, so I think they will have the most onus to make this change the quickest. And the others will follow suit or die trying probably, but it will happen, and that happens when what's desirable changes. The next thing I think is going to be insurance, which is interesting to think about. But when I got my car, the first thing I did is I called my current insurance company. I had AAA, and I said, hey, I'm getting a Tesla Model 3. Could you give me a quote? Their quote was $2,600 a year, which is absurd. So like that day, I was like, all right, well, let's go shopping around and move insurance companies. And this is with a bundle with another car and a house, and like this is absurd. So then I went shopping around. I called Progressive, and I had my quote from Tesla, which was pretty good. And I called Progressive. They came back $700. So I called both companies back, and I said, AAA, what is going on? You're a factor of over 4 higher than my other quotes. And the person told me, oh yeah, we're horribly backward when it comes to EVs. We haven't updated the models. We haven't taken into account that the Model 3 is the safest car ever tested by the IHS. That there's really not any moving parts. You're not going to risk having an engine catastrophically explode and stop wanting to make payments on it. If there's any kind of an accident, the likelihood of human injury is lower than ever before. They last forever, everything else. And the safety suite of self-driving tech and all the cameras and all the radar. They hadn't updated their models. And I called Progressive, it was the exact opposite thing. They said, oh yeah, we've recently updated our entire model of how we do this. And yeah, this is this is the quote. And the crazy part is the quote for the car that I sold to get the Tesla, it was a 2012 Civic, was not that much cheaper. And this is a car that's like a sixth the value. Just think about that, right? So what's going to happen in the next couple of years is I think the used car market is going to have some trouble. As Tesla goes forward with FSD, we have more full self-driving tech. It'll be really hard to insure an old gas car like my 2012 Honda Civic. It had nothing. It didn't have cameras. It didn't have any tech, no lane keep, none of that stuff, right? So reports will come out from some university where they say that the likelihood of accident or the person that was responsible for an accident invariably was the person without all this safety tech and safety features. And so what could really end up happening is you're buying a used car and the insurance quote might be $2,500 for an $8,000 car. And that's just going to sound so absurd to people that they're going to say, screw it, it's time to move on and get something newer. And the EVs have started at this point. There are no old, bad EVs without any safety tech. Like, the EV world has taken off and kind of set foot here at this point in time. So that's going to play another role. So first and foremost, and it's already happening again, the sale of internal combustion engine cars will start to slowly be phased out and banned entirely. And it'll happen first in countries with no gas car industry. So for this reason, like Germany, Japan, US, South Korea, those will be the last ones to ban it because they have huge billion-dollar industries. But think Norway. Norway doesn't make any gas cars and doesn't export any gas cars. The Norwegian government has no reason not to be super aggressive. The joke I've heard, and I haven't been to Norway in a while, I've only flown through Oslo once, but is there's more Teslas than any other car. You can just count them off, and it's just like every other car is a Tesla. And it's because, well, first of all, there's high cost of living, so they can afford these cars a little more than other parts of the world, potentially. But they have nothing to lose by banning gas cars. That's not true for Germany or the US. Like, they'll be the last countries to do this. But it'll start with countries like Norway. And surprisingly, China. The reason is China does make gas cars, but they don't export them. How many of you have owned a Chinese car? Yeah, I haven't, and no. So they'll be the next ones because the most dense urban areas in the world are probably in China, India, and so pollution and smog is a huge health concern. People in China understand this, and we in America kind of have a short-term memory, but there was a time when Los Angeles was similar. It was unbearable, and then the EPA happened. Well, now we're going back in time. Let's not talk about that. Let's keep this positive. So China will do the same thing, because if we're going to make cars, we have the potential to make industry at a scale like very few countries. Let's just make them electric. Let's just be on the forefront of this thing. And being a non-democratic state, they have the kind of power that no other country has. They can install EV charging facilities and build out an EV network faster than any other country on this planet because they don't really need to get approvals or anything else. They'll just go and force their will. And when that happens, Buick, which, I mean, if somebody in the audience owns a Buick, I'm not trying to, nothing personal, but a very undesirable car, they sell really well in China because to me, this is boring, terrible designed American car, but for them, it's an exotic American, ginormous monster that's like a symbol of wealth. Like, I'm so rich I have this obscenely massive Buick. But that will change to be, I have a Tesla Model S or something, right? Because again, the taste will change. But when China bans cars, what's GM going to do if their big market, the only market that they're growing in is China, stops buying EVs? What are they going to do? It's
sell Hummers. Electric cars.
Yeah. So the next one is the most depressing one, but I think it warrants being talked about, and that is geopolitical unrest. There's been no greater source of strife and human suffering in the last 100 years than petroleum companies. Their tactics and the things that they've done in the interest of keeping economies running has been just absurdly terrible. Just think about all the oil spills and I have a future video planned where I want to actually go on site, but the Taylor oil spill is been spilling oil into the Gulf of Mexico for 16 years to this day, right now. And we don't talk about this stuff enough, but this is just a miserable, miserable industry. And it's just been necessary until now. And it's just kind of a question of when that can change. But imagine if the next couple of years there's unrest, like oil prices might start to fluctuate, that stability in the market might decrease. There can be, conflict, bad things. Like there's any number of things can cause gas prices to fluctuate. And I pay closer to $4 a gallon for gasoline, but here it's like $2. But what if it was $3? What if it was $4 here? Or a couple of dollars more expensive wherever you live. It's going to be like the 70s all over again, right? And that could happen because that's what disruptions, what they do. The next one's way more exciting and way more fun, and that is the rise of new companies. So Tesla is the first new car company in the US since Ford to go public, since 1940s when Ford did it. There's a reason why. It's really hard to make gas cars and gas engines. You're not going to compete with Honda and Toyota. You're just not going to do it. If you have some delusion of grandeur that you're going to sit in your garage and make this engine that's going to be better than what Honda can make, no, you're not. The group of us, we could get to work for a year, all of us, sit down and try to make, not going to happen. Not going to happen. But electric cars, yeah. How many of you guys saw the Sony EV at CES? Yeah. That was the most important car, I think, at CES. And some of the other YouTubers have talked about this. But they have no plans of building a car. They have no desire to do that. That car was a test bed to say, anybody have a plan to build an EV? License our cameras and sensors, and Sony is an imaging sensor master, right? Most cameras have Sony sensors in them. They can build the SoCs, and they can build this entire platform. You build a sports car and work on the chassis tuning and the handling and the aero and the active aero, and just buy our suite of kit, get a skateboard from Tesla or whoever's making the battery and the drivetrain, and the group of us, in a couple of months, we can make an electric car, a really cool one, I guarantee it. In 3 months, lock us all in a room together, we could do that. And that's what's going to happen. And this is, again, why disruptions happen from the outside. Nobody could challenge Honda and Toyota, nobody. I know the Germans make great cars, but the Japanese make the best engines, and they've had a stranglehold on this thing for a long time. And that's about to end. We're about to enter an age where there's room for new companies. Rivian, that's one of the cars I'm really looking forward to seeing today, but Rivian wasn't starting up 20 years ago. They just weren't, and here they are. So there's going to be a lot of new companies and a lot of excitement and new investment and capital into a world of EVs. And so you ask yourself, today we have VW and BMW, Germany, Mercedes and Honda. Who will the players be in 20 years? That's exciting, because it might not be the people that you think it will be. The next one, let's see, did I miss anything? The next one is the idea of peak car, which is just the idea that we have saturated the market as far as every able-bodied person who could possibly buy a car has already bought one. And there's going to be a downward trend. There's probably a little bit of disagreement on if we are actually there or not. But the electric vehicle trend is going to kind of speed that up, because if you can keep your cars longer, they last longer, they're better built, or if the idea is you can buy a gas car or an electric car, those kinds of questions will cause the peak of gas cars to happen much more quickly. And this is all before, I haven't even talked about like the robo-taxi network or kind of the future of transportation, but think about that. If you can call Uber for a couple of bucks and go 20, 30 miles to a venue and do whatever you want to do and come home for a couple of bucks, all from a robo-taxi, and you could have your car work for you and make your money, that will completely just topple this entire thing. And that's kind of important, because again, this is why all the car companies right now cannot exist in 20 years. Like, we need to have, some of them are going to go bankrupt, basically, or be bought out and retooled. And it's going to be the electric cars that cause that. And probably for the best. The next one, and this is, I haven't talked about this much on my channel. I'm a mechanical engineer. When I came out of college, I wanted to design cars. I love cars. I've always loved cars. And the reason why, I was actually kind of thinking, okay, before I buy a Tesla, maybe I'll buy one more manual transmission car. One last hurrah for a year, sell it, and go electric. Because you're never going to be able to do it again. And I thought about it. You know, cars like a Honda S2000 or an Acura NSX have always kind of been cars I've kind of admired or thought about buying. But the thing is, the end of the gas car is happening, and I'm okay with it because everything I like about gas cars is over. Try to find a car with a manual transmission. I don't know if in Europe it's easier, it probably is. Like, I've had rental cars in Europe with stick shifts, but in the US, even the new Corvette, the C8 Corvette, automatic only. So whatever, the people I know who are still into gas cars, they like it because a standard transmission, rear-wheel drive, lightweight, fun to drive, whatever the case might be, all those things are over. No one makes coupes anymore. We're replacing standard transmissions with CVTs, which are just utterly miserable. They're just the worst transmissions. I can't stand driving them. So the thing is, there's nothing to miss. It's over. I think the way to think about this is you got to just accept it. Like, you know, some people have that nostalgia for the good old days, but the reality is the things that, like any car enthusiast, you know, I saw a 911 running laps when I pulled in here today. You kind of start to realize, like, the things that I loved are drawing to a close. But it's in the wake of a new chapter, which will be way better and way faster, and that'll be good. So yeah, the end of gas cars is happening, and the end of all the things that you loved about gas cars has already been happening for a while, right? Big engines are gone, now it's all little dinky things with turbos and CVTs. We're not missing anything. The next one is a little more technical, but the, in energy, there's an idea of EROI, or the energy return on investment. And the idea is, if I spend 1 kilowatt hour of energy on running a drill or something, and I extract oil, how much energy did I extract? And so back in the good old days, it might be 100 to 1, meaning you spend 1 kilowatt hour of energy and you extract 100 kilowatt hours of oil. That's great, right? That's good. That's not the case anymore. The oil that we're extracting now is shale oil, tar sands, and they have to be refined and processed and, you know, put into a centrifuge and separated, and there's so much that goes into it. Now the oil EROI is like 4 or 7. It's not like it used to be. All the easy to get to oil has kind of been extracted, and so people say there's still oil. That's true, but it's all about cost. Is it worth doing? If I can buy electricity at 6 cents kilowatt hour, here in Texas I think it's 6 or 7, why the hell would I want to buy oil? It doesn't make any sense. Again, we win on economics. As much as we want to have the notion of doing good for our children and all that stuff, the reality is we win when it's economically viable, and it's happening right now. And of course, then there's batteries. How are we on time, by the way? Sophie, we're okay? Yeah, we're good? Yeah, there's no one until 11, so I'm going to run a little bit over and have time for questions. But yeah, let's keep going. So the next thing is just battery tech. I mean, think about the level of disruption that happens with battery tech. In the gas car world, batteries didn't matter, and that meant that whatever innovation or R&D you put into your gas car, it didn't really translate to anything else. But think about the synergy that Tesla has. If they invest in batteries, that means they're selling power walls that are cheaper, better. They're selling cars. Their entire business lines up, right? So we don't have gas-powered cell phones or laptops. We have electric, right? This is the future. It's one of those things. It's an inevitability. And at some point, you realize if we start to invest in batteries, that cleans up our entire act. Because the only challenge with something like solar, for example, is storage. But if a home battery was half the price of what it is today, then you have solar panels and batteries, and you don't worry about what's happening with the utility company because you're self-sufficient. And when that happens again, you're charging your car for free, right? Or at very cheap prices. And there's no way you could possibly make sense of driving a gas car. You run the numbers and say, driving this gas car will cost us more with the higher insurance, the higher gas prices, than just going and leasing an EV. And even if you wanted to save money and make it more economic sense and got some very cheap, lower range EV, you'll probably find you can make it work and be cheaper. And that's like today. So just imagine the next couple of years, right? I think the biggest takeaway from this talk, I think, should be just generally optimism. We live in a time where that's probably in a little bit of a short supply. There's just like countless news cycles of all this negativity and stuff. And I think back to like the space race, right? Kennedy and that time when we looked up and we had this like, oh my God, what could be possible? Flying cars, like kids grew up dreaming about all the crazy things that could be possible. And then for a long time, I felt like we didn't have that. It was a lot of the same thing, all the powerful interests that kind of killed electric vehicle adoption earlier. To be honest, we should be driving electric vehicles 20 years ago. But until now, it could be crushed, and it was crushed. But now, it's a force of nature that there's no slowing down, and it's kind of evolve or die at this point. But there's just so much room and reason for optimism, because just think about the kinds of industries that will arise in the next 20 years. It's going to be different, but there's going to be a whole slew of tech that will arise from this, and things we haven't even thought about yet, right? Obviously, we could think, okay, well, one day we'll have the energy density in batteries to have electric airplanes. And imagine if the Boeing 737 you're flying on today was electric and made no noise and was quiet, and that's going to happen. But there's going to be some other stuff we haven't even thought about yet. Those are the easy ones that we can probably all imagine and have the creativity and the cleverness to figure out. But think about all the stuff that we haven't even thought about yet that could be possible when we go battery electric or look into the future. So for a bold prediction, I wanted to make a bold prediction, something crazy that you guys are going to say, oh, that's not going to happen. And maybe I'm wrong. I'm not saying I'm going to be right, but I have some predictions, I think, of what will happen the next, let's say, 5 years. I think one of the big car companies is going to go bankrupt. Don't know which one yet. I have an idea of one. So
I think it's BMW. I think it's BMW.
Okay, that's good. You said the answer I was thinking. He said Chrysler. That's just a company that's been, plagued with reliability issues, and they've just never made a really good car. And they might be the ones. Who knows? But maybe I think one company. What's that?
Maybe both.
Yeah. It might be maybe more. But there's going to be these upstarts and new players. Rivian. What happens when Rivian's making 100,000 vehicles a year? And there's other startups, and there's going to be some vaporware cars that don't actually ship because there's that gold rush kind of mentality. But a lot of them will. And so the first prediction is there's going to be some bankruptcies in the futures of some of these big companies. A second one, I think, is, let's see, I had one. Actually, let's I'm gonna turn it to you guys. Let's make a bold prediction. We got something.
Did you hear the Mad Money guy, Jim Kramer, what he just said about
Fossil fuels?
He's like,
yeah.
I'm done. It's over. And that's got to include oil companies and ICE car manufacturers.
That's a great one, right? That's how quickly the tides can turn. Jim Kramer was like, he didn't say a kind thing about Tesla for the longest time, and suddenly it's like, I'm done with petroleum, and that's pretty shocking. We'll see what happens with that.
The reason the ICE people ran out of ICE and lost their businesses, they didn't have $100 million worth of lobbyists in Washington to buy legislators.
Yeah.
So if we want this state to happen, we've got to go to the polls and vote for people that aren't funded by fossil fuels.
Yeah. It's a very good point. Neither did Blockbuster. That's a good point. Yeah, we did a video early on our channel on the story of Tucker and the Tucker car. And at the end, we talked about how there's this parallel with Tesla and what's happening now. But our thought was, things have changed. There's the levels of private equity and private capital to raise to try some crazy thing out like Rivian is just so much higher than it used to be, that you don't need like a loan from the DOT, or you don't need these kinds of things. You can just have a crazy idea, have rich people who believe in ideas, invest, and it's just harder to stop than it was before. That's absolutely right. Another one. Let's take a third one. Who's got one? There we go. I think he was first. I'm gonna walk back over here. Do we have a second mic, by the way? It's okay. I'll make it work. Sorry.
My idea is that I think as we ramp electric vehicles, it's going to totally remake politics across the world. Here we have a pretty big difference between one party that supports, renewables and another that doesn't. And also in the Middle East, most everything is behind oil-based, production. And as those things change, again, the politics of everybody in both areas is going to have to change with it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Some countries actually really do get it. Like Dubai has been diversifying their investment. They know that the end of oil is coming, and they've been prepared for that. But it'll be interesting who does and who doesn't.
Can I just say something about my sense of where change is? Because when you have these people like Kathy Wood of ARK Investments and Pierre Ferragu, when they're now on, they're not interrupting them as much. CNBC, whoa, stop. They're listening now. These people are listening. So I'm glad to see that.
Yeah, when Tesla's stock is at $700, it's kind of hard not to, I think. You had a question.
Sellers.
Yeah.
I don't know that it's a wild prediction, but I hope that the Saudi government will fall.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, the power structures around the world are going to be completely, turned topsy-turvy.
The bold prediction that I would like to hear is something where we're not using rare earth materials for the batteries. We need a battery, bio battery. We need something we can grow or mix as opposed to mine.
I think that does happen. I think that's. I think the first key is to move toward a battery. If you have a cell that's this big, what goes into it can change. But if you make this fundamental transition first, and the batteries get cleaner, like Elon has tweeted that the amount of cobalt in the Tesla batteries has gone from 12, 13% down to 3 and 2, and eventually he wants to get rid of it. But absolutely, yeah.
A mass adoption will require a massive change.
Absolutely.
Could you speak to economic change that you would foresee?
Economic change in any industry in particular, or?
Yeah, like the coal industry.
Yeah. Because of more of the resources are staying with the owners of electric cars and the batteries. If you're your own power company, like 30% of electric car owners produce their own power.
Great question. So I heard coal is already kind of dying. Coal companies are going bankrupt all the time. They just can't compete. They're too expensive and dirty. And again, you win on economics. Being eco-friendly won't get the 50% of the people. That they have to win on economics. And coal is already not economically viable. And that's just going to continue to be the case more and more. In terms of the economics, you can think about, and I want to do a video on this, but the utility companies are going to be pretty disrupted too, because you can say, well, we have solar, and what do we need you for? But I think there's generation and there's distribution, and the utility companies can still play a role. I call it the grid 2.0. Imagine if your utility company doesn't care where they buy the electricity from. Maybe it's from a huge nuclear power plant, maybe it's from your solar panels. But they could just be the broker. And imagine if when you're buying electricity, it's like a stock market, there's a bids and buys and sells, and you could just be buying from your neighbors. Like the power might just live within a little neighborhood because he has 30 panels and I only have 10 and I need some extra energy to charge my car. And they could just take a little microtransaction cut. And for the utility companies, they're okay because we still need connectivity, the grid. The generation companies are probably going to be in a different pickle. There's a question back there. Let's see if.
Yeah, I have a question about infrastructure. So you have these supercharger networks that are building out, but we still have these. We have roads. Is inductive charging going to be part of the future? Do you think?
That's a really good question. I think the problem with inductive charging is it's really inefficient. Just the energy attenuation that happens over distance is just so severe that there needs to be something like that. Maybe there could be like a direct contact or some other. There's going to be something, because that's right. Imagine rather than like plugging in, like wherever you're parked, or even as you're rolling, you could charge. That's a good question. It sounds like that's the sort of company that gets funded, right? If I'm an investor and you told me, like, hey, here's my idea for how we solve that problem, that's where my money's going, right? And this is part of the economic change that's going to happen. I think you had your hand up earlier. Sorry, 1 second. I missed you before. Oh, she has a mic. I'll get you next.
It's a prediction and also a question about the prediction is that the private car ownership will go down versus the car sharing programs. It's happening in Europe, in my country, Latvia. It's really popular, and the question is how popular and is it in the US, and your predictions how it will develop over time.
So Americans love their cars. I think people will still be buying cars, but imagine if you used to ride the bus and pay $4 one way or something. Imagine if you call the Tesla app and his car comes and picks you up because it's working for him while he's at home, and you could compete with that. There's no driver, easy to charge at 9 cents or 7 cents, whatever the price might be. So I think what's going to happen is public transportation might be disrupted in a way. Europe has great public transportation. We don't. If taking a bus here would take you like 5 times as long as driving. So there's going to be a shift, I think. And again, this is why the conventional makers are in trouble, because car sales will go down. But if you're a new EV company, like Tesla is going to sell every car they make, right? And so will Rivian and these other companies. So it's going to shift kind of the buying trends. But I think you're absolutely right. There's going to be a huge shift in like the model of how people perceive ownership. Are we okay on time? Do we have to wrap it up? One more? Okay. I wanted to get to you too.
Well, I have a question. In this era of rapidly evolving technology, on one hand, we want to get a battery norm where we can make mass production and reduce the cost. On the other hand, you're having new technology like solid-state batteries or something, which are coming up, and I'm wondering how that will sort of screw up the adoption, because if people are waiting for the next new thing, how does that work, and what's your feeling about that?
That's such a good question. Such a good question. I think the first thing you do is make incredibly crazy, awesome products like Tesla does, right? You're not saying, here's the e-Golf that is kind of like your Golf, but now it's electric. Here's a car that drives itself, goes 0 to 60 in 2.9 seconds, and you can have it today. And it's cheaper than the M3, and it's better than a Prius. And so the way you do it is just let people know, like, yeah, maybe in 5 years, my next one will be even more amazing, but this one is pretty damn amazing right now. And that's what Tesla has done that nobody else has, is shift that perception of what is like desirable, I think. And that's kind of how I kind of see it. Last one, sorry.
I was wondering, with all the third-party charging networks and the Tesla supercharger network and batteries getting better, like, what do you think is going to happen in 5 years with gas stations and all those third-party networks? Like, are we going to need them? Are they all going to survive?
That's a good question. I mean, is there any reason why if you were a gas station before, you don't rip those out and stick solar panels on your roof and buy a Tesla mega pack and have charging? I think those kinds of businesses just convert. Other businesses are going to be wiped out, and that's probably the sadder part. But I think in that case, maybe you just convert over. So I have to wrap up. Sophie's giving me the hook. Thank you so much for watching, you guys. Thank you for coming out. I'm here. Just come up to me anytime. I'll be here. Thank you so much.